Hello, everybody. Thank you for being here. We're going to give it a couple of minutes to let people connect before we get started. Thanks so much for being here. Going to give it about a couple more minutes before we go ahead and get started. Thanks so much for being here today. All right, I'm just going to give it one more minute and then we're going to go ahead and get started with today's presentation. Thank you all for being here today. We're going to start in about 30 seconds. I'm just giving folks a chance to join the call. All right. I think we're going to go ahead and get started. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to August Lunch and Learn presentation. My name is Emily, and I'm on the Programs and Outreach team here at the Enoch Pratt Free Library. Thank you for joining us for this month's edition of Lunch and Learn, the USS Maryland Silver Service. This program is presented in partnership with the Maryland State Archives and the Maryland 4 Centuries Project. If you have any questions during the program, please enter them into the comment or chat box below the video, and we'll address them at the end of the lecture. And now, we'll turn it over to Owen at the Maryland State Archives.
Thank you, Emily. Good afternoon, everybody, and thank you all for joining us. My name is Owen Lurie. I am the Outreach Coordinator at the Maryland State Archives. These Lunch and Learn lectures are an opportunity to hear stories of Maryland's people and to highlight the use of primary source record materials and the value of archives in uncovering shared heritage. Our presentation today is from my colleague Robin Gower, entitled The USS Maryland's Silver Service, History Captured in Repoussé, about the beautiful serving pieces made for the state's namesake naval vessel in the early 20th century. And if you have not had a chance to see these objects on display at the Maryland State House, I hope you have a chance to, because the pictures that Robin has today are really nice, but the objects themselves are stunning in person. The Maryland State Archives holds records of permanent value of the state of Maryland and serves as the state's historical agency. We also oversee the State House, including the silver pieces under discussion today. If you're interested in exploring our records for your own research, I hope that you will come and check us out. You can contact us and schedule a research appointment on our website, msa.maryland.gov. I hope that you will join us next month when Alexandra Deutsch, Director of Collections at the Winterthur Museum, will give a presentation about Elizabeth Patterson Bonaparte, Baltimore socialite who was married to Napoleon's brother. So much more to say about her as well. You can find a full list of programs, including videos of past presentations, on our website. You can also find more programs from the Pratt Library at prattlibrary.org. Now, to introduce our speaker, here is Bert Kummerow, Founding Director of the Maryland 4 Centuries Project.
Thank you, Owen, and greetings, everyone, during this blustery day. Welcome to another summer edition of our monthly Lunch and Learn lectures. We'd like to thank again our partners, the Enoch Pratt Free Library and the Maryland State Archives, which is featured today in our presentation. As always, as Owen said, our aim is to bring the best new information on Maryland history to you, our audience. My own operation, the Maryland's 4 Centuries Project, is continuing to work with the Maryland 250 Commission to plan for our state's participation in the 2026 US 250th anniversary. We are continuing to find Maryland historic double firsts both in our state and in the nation. Recent firsts include Aruna Miller, the first South Asian American woman lieutenant governor, and Yumi Hogan, the first Korean American former First Lady in the Hogan administration. We also have two firsts from the Olympics. Swimmer Michael Phelps with the most gold medals, 23 in Olympic history, and Katie Ledecky, also a swimmer and the most decorated woman in Olympic history with 14 medals. Well done, Maryland. It is the small state with a big history. And you can follow our search for firsts on our website, www.marylandmosaic.org. Today's lecture takes us into Maryland's most historic building. Our State House has loomed over the Annapolis skyline since the 1780s, and it was the first capital of the U.S. as our successful revolution against England ended. Recently, its iconic dome and the rest of its exterior are getting a facelift. When you enter the building, you soon realize that although it is 2.5 centuries old, it is still the heart of state government. Our State House is the country's longest continuously serving seat of government. As Maryland grew into a quote-unquote modern, annex was added in the early 1900s, and it was added to accommodate the two enlarged houses of the legislature and the executive offices. Today's lecture will concentrate on the quote-unquote old original wing of the State House under the building's dome. Within the last decade, the entire first floor of that wing has been renovated into a first-class museum. As you wander through the rooms dominated by the tall entrance hall and the reconstructed old Senate and House chambers, you will find many of Maryland's most important treasures. One of the rooms in this complex that gets less attention is adjacent to the restored House of Delegates Civil War era chamber. The old committee room is unassuming, but its contents are guaranteed to get your attention. Our speaker today, Robin Gower, is here to answer an obvious question. What is a large collection of old silver doing in our seat of government? Robin is ready to answer that question, and that answer is mixed up with more than a century of Maryland history. Robin Gower has the enviable task of working with the State House Trust to maintain and interpret a major museum in the State House. Balancing a museum collection with the modern needs of the Maryland legislature and its many bosses, including the governor, can be demanding. The job of curator of the state collection is at the center of action. The State House Trust, where Robin works, is also part of the Maryland State Archives, one of our partners. She has worked in the past with Historic Annapolis, the National Park Service, and Baltimore's Museum of Industry. And Robin is now confidently taking on the task of managing and interpreting the unmatched State House collection. Please join me in welcoming the curator of Maryland's Commission on Artistic Property.
Hello, everyone. Good afternoon. As Bert said, I'm very excited to be here today and talk to you about the USS Maryland Silver Service. So let me go ahead and pull up my presentation. Just a moment. All right. Now, so let's start at the beginning, shall we? Today, we're going to talk about an incredible set of silver held in the state of Maryland's collection. You might be wondering, just what about this silver makes it stand out among the many other pieces I have seen? And my goal is that by the end of this presentation, you'll have an answer to that very question. The Maryland Silver Service, or more specifically, the USS Maryland Silver Service, is an astonishing collection of 48 pieces of silver, featuring 167 scenes from Maryland's history. It's comprised of nearly 1,000 ounces of silver and was made in Baltimore by the famed firm of Samuel Kirk and Sons. You might be thinking, Wait, aren't there 23 counties plus Baltimore City and Maryland? How do you get 48 pieces? Well, each county is represented by at least one piece of silver, and some have more. For example, Garrett County is comprised of 6 candlesticks, while 14 other counties have just one. Additionally, there are 12 punch cups that go around the punch bowl. Each one represents a naval hero from Maryland and not a county. So why was this service made, and for what purpose? The reason, quite simply, was in keeping with tradition and creating a formal silver service to use on board the ship bearing the state's name, the USS Maryland. Now, there have been several vessels named the USS Maryland. I'll mention them just briefly, as there could be an entirely separate lecture about each of them. The first USS Maryland was a sloop of war with 20 guns, built in Baltimore in 1799. Her first commanding officer was Captain John Rogers, who was represented by one of the service's punch cups. This Maryland was decommissioned after just a few years in October of 1801. We're going to skip ahead one vessel and move forward to the third USS Maryland, also known as the Old Mary or the Fighting Mary to her crewmates. It was a Colorado-class battleship, 624 feet long and heavily armed. She was a battleship after all. Notably, this USS Maryland was at Pearl Harbor on December 7, 1941, and sustained relatively light damage during the attack. Here she is pictured in the aftermath on the left, next to the capsized USS Oklahoma. Fortunately, the silver had already been removed from the ship and stored in San Diego before she had traveled to Hawaii in 1940, and therefore remained unharmed. After 26 years of service, the Fighting Mary was decommissioned in 1947 and ultimately sold for scrap in 1959. The fourth and current USS Maryland is an Ohio-class ballistic submarine with the very cool motto of "Fear only God and dishonor." It has been in active service since 1992 and measures 560 feet long, has 24 missile tubes and 4 torpedo tubes. She is manned by a crew of 13 officers and 121 enlisted. Now, I don't know if it's just me that I thought submarines were relatively small, but if that seems really large to you, as it did to me, you're not wrong. Here is an image of the USS Maryland at the dry dock upon its completion, so you can see for scale just how large this submarine is. But we'll talk more about this USS Maryland later on. For now, I want to highlight the ship that the silver was made for, the 1905 USS Maryland cruiser. In 1901, construction began on a new USS Maryland in Newport News, Virginia. If you recall, there hadn't been one since 1799. On April 18th, 1905, the Pennsylvania Armored Class Cruiser was commissioned with Captain R.R. Ingersoll in command. She was a beautiful and impressive ship, 503 feet long and filled with the latest technology of her day. While the construction of the vessel was still underway, in 1904, Maryland's Governor Edwin Warfield commissioned the creation of a custom silver service to be placed on the new armored cruiser. It would be a gift from the state to the ship bearing its name. In order to see the project to completion, the Maryland Cruiser Fund Commission was created. Their mission was to both raise funds for the project and create design concepts for the service. In 1905, the commission undertook a massive statewide fundraising effort, which appealed to patriotism and civic duty. They specifically targeted school-age children, women, and, quote, the rich and poor. In October 1905, the commission was close to meeting its goal, and they made an appeal in the Baltimore Sun, stating that as every county will be represented on the designs of the silver service, the commission is of the opinion that every section of the state should be represented in the contributions. As donations came in, they were chronicled in the newspapers around the state. Miss Waters, who was the ship's sponsor, wrote in a letter published to the Baltimore Sun, stating, "By the Baltimore papers, I am glad to see that a fund is being raised by the people of Maryland for the purpose of presenting a suitable testimonial to the United States cruiser bearing the proud name of our state. To doubt that the movement will be crowned with success would be an insult to the patriotism of all Maryland." The Contributions ranged from $1 to $100, and about 75% of those funds came from Baltimore, and only half of the other 23 counties were represented in the donations. In May 1906, the goal of $5,000 had been met, although the commission was still trying to lobby the Senate Finance Committee for an additional $1,500 to cover the cost of the presentation ceremonies. But before we can talk about the presentation, let's talk about the design and physical construction of the silver. Soon after the creation of the Maryland Cruiser Commission Fund, the contract to design and fabricate the silver service was awarded to Baltimore firm Samuel Kirk and Sons, founded in 1815. And their silver is known not just locally, but nationally as well. Now that a fabricator had been selected, designs needed to be created. More specifically, the commission needed to select which elements of the country's history would be chosen for each piece, a monumental task. Not only would they need to create a list of historically significant places and events, but they would need to think about how those stories would be translated visually into pieces of silver. A member of the commission, a Colonel William H. Love, was known as a, quote, keen student of Maryland history, and worked alongside, quote, prominent citizens of various counties to create these lists. Monthly meetings were held by the commission, provided a time for discussion and decisions. Once a narrative was selected, they searched for reference images to provide to Kirk for their manufacture. Later in life, the chairman of the commission, E. Stanley Gary, donated his scrapbook, which precisely listed the inspiration from which many of the designs came. Although Kirk frequently conferred with the commission, it has been said that Mr. Kirk is due the entire credit for the artistry and simple beauty for which the silver is famous. So how does this become this? I'd like to pause here for just a moment and appreciate the workmanship in this silver. On the top left, you can see an excerpt from the chosen reference image. Then below it, you can see an excerpt from the original drawings completed by Kirk, and the final work as it appears on the silver in the bottom right. When the contract for the silver service was awarded, the grandson of the founder, Henry C. Kirk Jr., was instructed by the president of the company, his father, to, quote, drop everything else and stay with this job until it is completed. And drop everything they did. A dedicated team worked on the project for 6 months in order to reach their deadline. Only the most skilled artisans of Samuel Kirk and Son were assigned to the task. A report about the process in the Baltimore Sun stated that at times there were as many as 35 skilled silversmiths working on it. Every one of those pieces was made in the house of the contractors by workmen in their employ. Not one man was taken on, nor one man discharged during the period required to complete the set. While Kirk Jr. may have been overseeing the designs and the project management, it was the team of 35 silversmiths who brought these pieces to light. While we do not know the names of everyone, we do know the names of a few. One craftsman was George H. Dumler, pictured here. In this picture, it was also taken about circa 1900 in the workroom of Samuel Kirk and Son in Baltimore, about the same time that the Maryland service is being made. Dumler's descendants donated this photograph along with 2 photographs of the Baltimore Punch Bowl and the Anne Arundel County centerpiece, which may indicate that those are the 2 pieces he worked on. Oral history from his family also indicates that he was responsible for replicating the Great Seal, which was no small feat. George H. Dumler was born in Baltimore in December 1877. It's unclear when he started working in silver, but he is listed at 21 years old on the 1900 U.S. Census as employed as a chaser silverware. A chaser is a highly skilled artisan who applies 3-dimensional decorations to the pieces of silver. Interestingly, one Walter Rogers, a British immigrant just a few years older than Dumler, is listed on the next line as a boarder in the same residence. His occupation, too, is chaser silverware. Perhaps he, too, worked at Kirk and is also in this photograph. Another craftsman was Louis J. Foister. Born in Baltimore, Foister showed an aptitude for art at a young age, even securing a scholarship to the Maryland Institute of Art, although his family's finances meant that he needed to seek employment in a trade. Only 15 years old, in May of 1901, he secured an apprenticeship with Kirk to learn silver, chasing, and drafting. Once at Kirk, he also became involved in the design department, working with salesmen and prospective customers to create suitable designs to be engraved upon various pieces of silver. Here he is, photographed in the Kirk studio in 1901. Now, we know of Foister's involvement because his name is actually engraved under John Hanson on the plateau of the Anne Arundel County centerpiece, the only name that we have found on any of the pieces of silver. Now, if you're like me and a visual learner, it's hard to appreciate just how intricate the process of making the silver is without seeing it. I found this wonderful film circa 1950 from Samuel Kirk and Son showing exactly how they make their silver. So let's watch just a quick segment of that film on what Repoussé silver is.
Another famous Kirk way of decorating is hand-chased repoussé. The artist silversmith first draws the design directly on the silver. Then follows his sketch, hammering the design up from underneath. The French word for raising from beneath is repoussé, hence the name of this famous Kirk pattern. Once the basic design is raised, hot pitch from southern pines is ladled into the pot. Upon cooling, it solidifies and reinforces the silver, which then can be chased. This hand chasing begins with a careful outline of each flower and wreath. Gradually, realistic details are made with a variety of tools, tools the chaser either makes himself or inherits. The chaser is really a sculptor with an individual style. Another famous Kirk way of decorating.
There we go. The silver service was completed by late April 1906 in an attempt to make the silver service, paid for by the public, accessible to as many people as possible, and probably a bit of self-promotion for Samuel Kirk and Son. The silver was put in the windows of their shop in Baltimore. Starting May 15th, the public could come by every day that week to see the spectacular silver on exhibition at 106 to 108 East Street in Baltimore. The silver was then taken to Annapolis the day before the official presentation ceremony. The affair in Annapolis on May 31st, 1906 was certainly one to behold. Ships filled the Chesapeake Bay, all hoping to get a glimpse of the silver and the presentation ceremonies, which would be happening on the decks of the USS Maryland. Of note in attendance was the Secretary of the Navy, Charles J. Bonaparte, Governor Edwin Warfield of Maryland, USS Maryland Captain R.R. Ingersoll, and Mayor Edmund Tinimus of Baltimore, as well as, of course, Henry Kirk Sr. and Jr. and members of the Maryland Cruiser Fund Commission. As expected with ceremonies of this nature, there was a lot of fanfare and many speeches. In a letter published by the Baltimore Sun on the day of the presentation, Captain Ingersoll wrote, "It is a satisfaction to know that it will be a little different from the meaningless masses of metal, and that the service will have a historical significance. Surely no more artistic workmanship could be had anywhere than that of Messrs. Samuel Kirk and Son Company, who are so widely known to all, naval men especially." Now, while not an image of the presentation on the USS Maryland, I think this image provides a bit of visual reference for that day. Although, as with the opulence of the silver, the presentation on the Maryland was far more elaborate than this. The Baltimore Sun described the scene. At one end of the deck, there was a high and carpeted platform, upon which were chairs for the distinguished guest. Just in front of the platform was another raised stand, not quite so high, also elaborately decorated with flags and a profusion of field daisies. Upon this, artistically arranged under the direction of Mr. Henry C. Kirk, Jr., each piece was set out to show it at its best advantage. Since I just presented an image of the Arkansas silver, I thought it would be a good time to share a few other ships' silver services to have a bit of comparison. As you can see from the USS Idaho on the left and the USS Oklahoma on the right, the Maryland's design and grandeur far outweighs many of its counterparts in other vessels in both detail and number of pieces. I'd like to transition now to speaking more directly about the individual pieces of silver, including their unique designs. And while time constraints mean I'm unable to present on all 167 designs, I highly encourage you to visit the Maryland State Archives webpage. We've recently updated the page to allow you to click a detailed image of each of the designs and read a short write-up of the history being presented. So even though I just said that each piece is unique, there are 6 themed motifs that repeat on each piece of silver throughout the service. Without them, the service would feel mismatched, like an assemblage of gathered pieces rather than a well thought out, meticulously detailed and cohesive set. The USS Maryland is inexorably linked to the history of the United States itself. And to represent the national significance of each piece, there is an eagle, one of the most well-known symbols of our country, prominently placed. Sometimes the eagle appears on sides of dishes and platters. Sometimes it soars above the piece, looking like it's about to swoop down and catch its prey. And other times with wings outstretched, looking like it's about to propel itself to the sky. To represent the state as a whole, the Great Seal of Maryland is at the forefront of each piece of silver, as seen here on the pieces from Frederick County on the left and Anne Arundel County on the right. The seal consists of a shield bearing the Calvert and Crossland arms under an earl's coronet and a full-faced helmet. The shield is supported on one side by a farmer, which represents Maryland, and on the other side by a fisherman, representing Avalon in Newfoundland, both of which were Lord Baltimore's estates. To balance out the Great Seal of Maryland, a depiction of the USS Maryland cruiser is placed opposite it. It can be found either directly across from the seal, as on the rose platter from Howard County, or on the opposite side of the piece, such as on this sauce boat from Somerset County. It represents the United States Navy and quite literally the ship that it is intended to be used on. To continue to elaborate on the uniqueness of each county, the theme of county runs through the service. It's symbolized by local scenes of flowers, fruits, trees, and vegetables, oftentimes highlighting the native elements that are found or associated with those counties. Maryland's connection to the Chesapeake Bay and the oyster industry can be seen on pieces such as this rim of the Caroline County compote dish. Native trees such as oak, birch, pine, and hemlock and chestnut are interwoven into historic scenes, such as the pine trees on the Prince George's County coffee waiter or the red maple, which comprises the shaft of the Garrett County candlesticks. Closely related in style, the next theme is hospitality, symbolized by the flowing horns of plenty or cornucopias. Just like the previous theme, each piece is customized to feature plants and animals found in the county. The Great Seal on the Cecil County fish platter is flanked by fish and nets against a backdrop of swamp grasses and cattails. Other cornucopias feature fruits, vegetables, and grains. A personal favorite design element by the makers was placing an inverted cornucopia on the neck of this Calvert County coffee pot, or being used as handles on the Washington County vegetable dish on the right. Here, the functionality and natural forms of the piece align with design principles, creating something that meets both the standards of practicality as well as the theme. And last but not least, the final common element is nautical, represented by a thick twist of rope. Once again, the service is reminding us that its purpose is for use on board a naval ship. It is utilized on pieces as a trim or border, which establishes a cohesive look for the pieces, no matter their size or shape. Here we can see the rope trim around the square-shaped Montgomery County ice cream platter. And here it is around the rim of the Repoussé County sauce boat, the Dorchester County compote dish and surrounding the small Kent County serving waiter. The first piece I'd like to highlight individually is the largest piece in the USS Maryland Silver Service set, and it's the punch bowl, plateau, and ladle representing Baltimore City and County. This show-stopping piece is supported on a plateau with 4 diamondback terrapins and is accompanied by the 12 punch cups representing the naval heroes. There are 17 designs on the set, ranging from the laying out of the city, the War of 1812, and monuments, as well as 9 technological inventions such as the electric railroad and gas lighting, either first invented or applied in Baltimore. The Great Seal and the cruiser are surrounded by wreaths of oak, horse chestnut, and mulberry. A festoon of tobacco leaves separates each scene, while oyster shells form the border of the bowl. The handle of the ladle is a reproduction crownstone marker from the Mason-Dixon line. And getting specifically now into those 167 designs, the first one I'll start with is called The Birth of the Star-Spangled Banner. It's a small design, and it features both an image of the flag, or I guess I should say the American flag, and the song. It is one of several images on the punch bowl related to the events of War of 1812 and our national anthem. As the story surrounding our national anthem is a bit better well known, I'll summarize it briefly. Lawyer Francis Scott Key was on board the ship in the Chesapeake Bay during the bombardment of Fort McHenry in mid-September 1814, where he watched from afar. Inspired by the resilience of the American flag over Fort McHenry, Key penned a song that would later be known as the Star-Spangled Banner, which was designated as our national anthem by Congress in 1931. The story I would like to highlight is that of the making of the flag itself. While many of us might be able to recall that Mary Pickersgill worked on the flag, new perspectives have brought additional previously untold stories to light. During the War of 1812, the residents of Baltimore knew it was just a matter of time before the British would attack the city, then the 3rd largest in the U.S. Not knowing precisely when that attack would occur, they began preparing for it. Major George Armstead, Fort McHenry's commanding officer, desired to have a flag, quote, so large that the British will have no difficulty seeing it from a distance. In 1813, he ordered the large garrison flag 30 feet by 42 feet for the fort. Mary Pickersgill, a ship and signal flag maker, enslaver, and widow, was chosen for the task. She did not labor alone. For 7 weeks, she worked with her 13-year-old daughter, Caroline, a 13-year-old niece, a 15-year-old niece, and possibly her mother. But that's not where the story ends. At least 2 more people were present. 13-year-old African-American indentured apprentice Grace Wisher, and possibly an enslaved person whose name we do not know. As a Smithsonian blog on Wisher highlights, her work is another testament to the deeply rooted, yet oft unmentioned contributions of African Americans to the very core of this country. The National Park Service reports that Grace had been indentured as an apprentice in 1809 when she was about 10 years old by her mother, Jenny Wisher, who was a free African American. Grace's work would have included household chores such as food preparation, laundry, and cleaning, and she likely performed this alongside one enslaved person, a woman who was known to be part of the Pickersgill household. By 1813, Grace would have been 5 years into her apprenticeship, and Mary certainly would have drawn upon her skills to assist in such a massive undertaking. It's important also to recognize the labor of the unnamed enslaved person. As public historian Emanuel Murr points out, that even if the enslaved resident labored around the house and not directly on the flag, their domestic labor still contributed to the flag's production by freeing up time for other house members to work on it. This story is just one of the many examples of how rich in detail and how carefully crafted the design of the Silver Service is. I would like to pause here and note that there are 2 scenes on the service that directly depict slavery in Maryland. Both are found on the St. Mary's water pitcher. One scene depicts enslaved individuals pulling a hogshead down a rolling road, and the other scene is of the slave quarters on the Brougham estate. Today, we can look upon these and understand the harsh realities of Maryland's legacy of slavery and acknowledge that not every scene on this service will elicit a sense of pride. On the plateau of the Punch Bowl set is a depiction of the Battle Monument in Baltimore. In 1815, the Committee of Vigilance and Safety, which was responsible for the administration of Baltimore during the War of 1812, erected a monument to those who had fallen in defense of the city at the battles of North Point and Fort McHenry. This monument is unique as it is dedicated to all 39 soldiers, regardless of their rank. Modeled after a sarcophagus, the 52-foot-high Egyptian-style structure is considered to be the first of its kind in the United States. Designed by French-born architect Maximilien Godfrey, the base consists of 18 layers of marble, which represented the 18 states comprising the Union at the time. Other symbols on the monument include those for unity and victory, and a figure of Lady Baltimore holds a ship's rudder, representing Baltimore's nautical role in the war. The monument became so well known and iconic that it became the official emblem of the city of Baltimore and was adopted as the city's city seal in 1827. Its design was used again in 2001 when creating a new logo for the city. Also in 1827, President John Quincy Adams gave a toast at Barnum City Hotel at the end of a several-day visit to the city. In my opinion, it perfectly summarizes the designs featured on the Baltimore Punch set. Baltimore, the monumental city. May the days of her safety be as prosperous and happy as the days of her danger have been trying and triumphant. Moving on to another piece, we're going to look at Harford County, which is represented by two entree dishes. The first of these dishes features Tudor Hall. The short, succinct story about this entry is that in 1821, celebrated Shakespearean actor Junius Brutus Booth immigrated to America and settled in Harford County. Unable to purchase land, he rented a rural property in Bel Air and moved into a small log cabin from a neighboring property. In 1852, shortly before his death, Booth began construction on his estate, which he named Tudor Hall. The house was patterned after the English cottages he had known as a boy, with latticed casement windows, window balconies, and a rambling floor pan. Tudor Hall was listed on the National Register of Historic Places in 1973, and it currently operates as a small museum and is open to visitors the spring through the fall. The less distinct story about the family is this entry, I guess I should say, is the family behind the house. If reality TV was a thing in the mid-19th century, I can imagine that a show about the Booths would be a popular hit. It all starts with the parents, doesn't it always? Well-known Shakespearean actor Junius Brutus Booth came to Harford County in 1821 with his pregnant, quote, wife, Mary Ann Holmes. I use quotation marks because they were not actually married. Booth was still, in fact, married to a Marie Delanoy, whom he already had a young son with. Booth had told Delanoy that he would be touring America for several years, but he'd visit and send money when he could. And this is just the start. Mary Ann and Junius Brutus Booth go on to have 10 children, many of whom follow in their father's footsteps in becoming actors or involved in the arts in some way. One of their sons, Edwin, was sent to travel with his father at a young age of 13, not to learn the trade, but to keep his father sober and monitor his behavior. According to the biography of Junius Brutus Booth on the National Portrait Gallery's website, Booth carefully chose his roles that he felt were suited to his relatively small, lean frame. In addition to Richard III, he often played Iago, Hamlet, Shylock, and Macbeth. Personal sorrow, including an unhappy marriage and death of 2 children, led to Booth's emotional instability and alcoholism, but audiences never lost their affection for him. At the end of his career, some critics insisted that he had reached new heights of grandeur when he was the most troubled. Edwin does learn about the stage and builds his own reputation as an actor. His brothers, Junius Brutus Booth Jr. and John Wilkes, also take to the stage. Yes, that John Wilkes Booth. Like all Shakespearean tragedies, the troubled family unravels. Junius Brutus would be caught in his lies by Delanoy shortly before his death, which blindsided his other wife, Mary Ann. His first son, Richard, would continue to fight for legitimacy. Edwin disowned John Wilkes after Lincoln's assassination, and while he continued to have a successful acting career, he would never perform in Washington, D.C. again. Her sister, Asia, penned a memoir that was supposed to be about their father, but ultimately became a defense of her brother, John Wilkes. And all this drama unfolds around and is inexorably tied to the home, Tudor Hall. There are dozens of other stories, some deep and complex, and some more like fun facts, such as how the descendants of the founders of Ellicott Mills, which today we know as Ellicott City, Captain John M. Ellicott, was actually the executive officer on the USS Maryland during the presentation of the Silver Service in 1906, and later from 1911 to 1913 was the Maryland's commanding officer. And again, just pausing to admire the reference image map by Saxey & Co. and the silver, that piece that you can see how they so dutifully and perfectly replicated that image onto. Another anomaly is the St. Mary's water pitcher, which is supposed to depict a scene of St. George fighting a dragon, but it actually depicts St. Michael. While both legends are similar, St. George is the patron saint of England and is believed to have been a mortal and a martyr. St. Michael, on the other hand, is a patron saint of France and is a biblical archangel. St. Michael is typically drawn with wings holding a spear, while St. George is depicted without wings, mounted on horseback, fighting with a sword and shield. Based upon these descriptions, I began to think that the depiction on the Silver Service might actually be St. Michael, and the details that I thought initially might have been fire behind him might be angel's wings. My suspicions were confirmed when in the scrapbook it stated that the design was indeed taken from an image of St. Michael. As this tableau is meant to highlight religious tolerance in Maryland, I think the makers of the service really did mean for it to be St. George, as an additional moral of his story is the idea of Christianity triumphing over persecution. You might be wondering if this service was ever used or just a visual spectacle to behold. It was in fact used various times over the course of its life, and Admiral Hill, who literally wrote the book on the Silver Service, recalls using the silver as a young officer on board the USS Maryland. He stated that in 1911, Captain Ellicott was keenly interested in the Silver Service and permitted it to be used during all formal entertainment on board. Ellicott also allowed Hill and other officers to borrow pieces of the service for their use in the junior officers' mess. This makes it clear that the service was indeed used, if not well loved, aboard the 1906 cruiser. However, things had changed by the time Hill was reassigned to the Maryland, this time in 1928, aboard the battleship. Hill remarks that the service had now assumed the formal status of a relic and was carefully locked up in a large glass cabinet in the admiral's cabin. Not even on formal occasions do I recall it being put to any use. Now, this is an image from the USS New Jersey battleship and their silver cabinet in the captain's cabin. So I think this gives a good reference of what that may have looked like on the Maryland as well. The service likely held on to its relic status for most of its time on board the battleship before being placed in storage during World War II. However, a picture from Life magazine in a photo shoot in 1939 reveals two of the Garrett County candlesticks in use. How often they were used as opposed to being props for this particular press event is unclear. After the war, Senator George Radcliffe, who was also the president of the Maryland Historical Society, requested that the silver be taken out of storage and loaned to the institution. At that point, it was 1947, and the Maryland had been decommissioned. So now there was no longer a vessel with the name Maryland. So in 47, his mission to get that silver was successful, and the silver service was cleaned by Samuel Kirk and Son and put on display in the museum. In 1962, the service was transferred from the Maryland Historical Society for additional public exhibit at the Maryland State House, where it has resided ever since. Though where it has been displayed has changed over the years. For example, here it is pictured in the rotunda in 1975. On occasion, however, certain pieces like the punch bowl were lent to Government House, which is the official residence of the governor of Maryland. This is a great image of the punch bowl from the Holiday Open House in 1983. And several of my predecessors also recall taking the punch bowl across the street from the State House to Government House for special occasions, although that practice stopped nearly 30 years ago and is not something we would do today. Now, hopefully, I have you all very excited about this unique silver service, and you're probably wondering where you can see it. I have some great news for you. You can see it 24/7, 7 days a week at the Maryland State Archives webpage. But if you would like to see it in person, which I do highly recommend, it is on display in the caucus room of the Maryland State House, which is open to the public 8:30 to 5 p.m. every day, except for Christmas and New Year's. So that's 7 days a week. You can go down and take a look at that silver. There are only 4 pieces of silver that you will not be able to see. 2 candlesticks from Garrett County, as well as the creamer and sugar bowl, both from Charles County and pictured here. These pieces are currently on board the USS Maryland submarine, keeping both with the tradition of and fulfilling their intended purpose of being on board a ship of their namesake. On May 19th, 1992, Governor Schaefer, along with State Archivist Dr. Pappenfuse, presented the 4 pieces to the captains of the USS Maryland. As I reflect on this incredible service, which I've had the privilege to learn about and share with you all today, I marvel at the fact that it even exists. How these selected histories had to be so meticulously and thoroughly researched at a time long before the digital age and in a relatively short time span. As I began to pull the descriptions together for the updated webpage, I appreciated just how accurate much of this information still was, especially given that I had the benefit of another 100 years and more resources at my fingertips than they could have ever imagined. A set like this would be, I think, almost impossible to create today. You'd have to have collaboration between so many groups. But really, I think the price tag alone might give a little pause. If you look at the price of silver for 1,000 ounces, the cost would be $32,000 today. And that's just the cost of the silver. That would not even include any of the labor related to this project. And if you're curious what the value of the $5,000 that was raised in 1905, with inflation, that would be about $170,000 today. And I still don't know if you'd be able to achieve that with this project within a budget of $170,000 in 2024. I cannot think of a better way to end this presentation than to quote a portion of a speech given by the mayor of Baltimore on May 31st, 1906, during the presentation ceremony. It is a gift and an assurance from the residents of this state to the people of our whole country, and forms another link in the chain of friendship which binds and cements the state and nation, a patent evidence of undivided and undissolvable union. No matter where you find yourself, in foreign ports or on the high seas, it will be with patriotic pride that you point to this history of almost insurmountable difficulties overcome by your forefathers. Thank you all so much for having me today. My contact information is on the screen. I'm happy to answer questions, but if you think of something later, please feel free to give me a call or an email, and I'm happy to talk to you about the silver.
Great. Thank you so much. That was such an informative presentation. We do have some questions that came through social media. You kind of started to answer this question, but I'd love to hear more. Jerry's asking, do other states have something like this?
Yes, so it was a tradition for the state to present silver to a ship bearing its name. And sometimes with other ships, I believe like the New Jersey, when they had an older ship and a newer ship, they actually added to a silver service that was already existing. So this was a fairly common practice, and many states have them. It's just a matter of where and how they're displayed. Some are in public view and some aren't.
Great. Another user has asked, is it ever used? You kind of had intimated that there are some pieces in use, but is it ever taken out and used?
Not anymore. The full set, with the exception of the 4 pieces on the USS Maryland. I'm not sure if they use it or if it's also just protected behind glass. Those pieces, they might be used, but the pieces today are just for display purposes only.
Cool. That's great. What is your favorite piece out of all the ones that you've had the pleasure of researching?
Oh, that's hard. I think it might be the Baltimore set because of the terrapins on the plateau. They're just these cute little turtles that go all the way around it. That's just delightful.
Lovely. Great. We have some comments coming through saying thank you so much. This was very interesting and knowledgeable. Lots of people are looking on the Maryland Archives webpage already, so thank you so much for sharing us with that. This concludes today's presentation. Thank you so much, Robin, for this essential work and for sharing it with us this afternoon. I'd also like to thank our partners at the Maryland State Archives and the Maryland 4 Centuries Project. Thank you to the Maryland Hearing and Speech Agency for providing us with accessibility for today's program. And thank you, our audience, so much for joining us this afternoon. We couldn't do these programs without you. Stay safe, take care, and everyone have a great rest of your day.